On March 14, 1943, in the North Atlantic, approximately 380 miles southwest of Iceland, the personnel of the British frigate HMS Starling watched as their sonar technician's expression turned grim. A contact at bearing 270 was detected 1,200 yards away, moving rapidly with multiple acoustic signatures. Commander Frederick Walker moved to the plotting station as his team identified 3 distinct submerged targets. It was a coordinated wolfpack attack, a tactical method that had claimed over 500 Allied merchant ships in the previous 6 months alone. His escort vessels had been pursuing these signals for 11 straight hours, resulting in nothing but empty sea and depleted depth charge racks. Suddenly, an inexplicable visual appeared on the surface plot. An officer reported seeing objects in the water at bearing 285, specifically kitchen scraps like bread and vegetable skins. The lookout sounded confused by the freshness of the waste. Walker paused, his hand remaining still over the navigation chart. No submarine would discharge galley refuse while being pursued. The standing orders were to remain silent and leave no evidence. Every U-boat officer knew that such debris led to certain detection. It was tactically nonsensical unless the waste was not actually waste at all. Walker shifted his gaze from the floating debris to the sonar targets that had abruptly stopped moving. The submarines had ceased their evasive maneuvers and were holding steady just outside depth charge range, waiting for the British to hunt phantom signals while they calculated torpedo paths. What Walker would discover over the following 40 minutes, combined with the findings of an unconventional cook on a submarine across the Atlantic, would fundamentally change anti-submarine combat and turn the predators into the prey. By March 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical turning point. German U-boats were destroying merchant shipping at a rate that outpaced the production capacity of American and British shipyards. In the first quarter of 1943 alone, 108 Allied vessels were sunk, totaling 627,000 tons of lost cargo. At that speed, the United Kingdom would be forced into surrender within 18 months due to starvation. Regardless of the outcomes in North Africa or on the Eastern Front, the grim statistics were undeniable. Germany's Admiral Karl Donitz directed 435 active U-boats, and his Wolfpack strategies, coordinated group strikes on convoys, had proven exceptionally deadly. A single convoy might be targeted by 10 submarines attacking from various angles simultaneously, overwhelming defenses designed for lone raiders. Convoys SC-122 and HX-229 had recently lost 21 ships in 4 days, while the escorts managed to sink only 1 U-boat in return. For every submarine destroyed, Germany was sinking 20 Allied vessels. The Type 7 U-boat, the primary vessel of the German Navy, was a nearly flawless tool for this conflict. Displacing 770 tons when submerged and capable of reaching depths of 750 feet, it was armed with 14 torpedoes and a deck gun, allowing it to patrol for 3 months without refueling. Its diesel engines provided 17 knots on the surface, faster than most cargo ships, while electric motors enabled silent underwater stalking. Most importantly, its reinforced hull and compartmentalized interior made it extremely difficult to sink. British escort officers faced a nearly impossible tactical dilemma. Sonar technology, then called ASDIC by the Royal Navy, could track a submerged submarine up to 2,500 yards under perfect conditions. However, depth charges had to be dropped directly over a target, and U-boats could dive below the lethal depth of standard explosives while performing sharp, evasive turns at 7 knots. The attacking frigate would lose sonar contact the moment it passed over the submarine at 15 knots, creating a blind spot where the target could change direction and escape. Commander Donald McIntyre, an experienced escort leader since 1941, noted in his reports that while they could find and chase the enemy, killing them required immense luck or forcing them to the surface where deck guns could be used. The odds favored the submarine 9 times out of 10. This frustration was both tactical and deeply emotional. Escort crews watched tankers explode, saw sailors perish in burning oil, and rescued survivors from freezing waters, only to spend hours bombing sonar echoes that simply disappeared. The U-boats would go deep, stay quiet, and wait for the British ships to exhaust their supplies and depart. Naval intelligence desperately sought patterns, and the Admiralty's anti-submarine division analyzed every battle for weaknesses in German methods. They knew submarines had to surface eventually for air, radio, or speed, but predicting when and where was difficult since each commander acted independently. What made the circumstances particularly maddening was that the Allies had decrypted the German Enigma codes. They could monitor U-boat communications, map patrol sectors, and steer convoys away from wolf packs. However, the actual tactical combat, the moment British destroyers met German submarines, still relied on sonar, explosives, and pure chance. For nearly a year, escort groups had experimented with various new depth charge patterns and search techniques, but nothing had fundamentally altered the outcome of the hunt. Then an unexpected factor emerged, not from naval research labs or tactical schools, but from the kitchen of the USS Barb, an American submarine operating 6,000 miles away in the Pacific. German submarine commanders had every reason to feel secure. In March 1943, they operated with near total freedom across the Atlantic. Captain Reinhard Herdigen, commander of U-123, had personally destroyed 22 ships. His assessment, shared by many German aces, was that British escorts were predictable and followed rigid doctrines. Once their search patterns were understood, escaping them became a routine matter. The German tactical manual, the U-Boot Fahrerhandbuch, highlighted this vulnerability. Allied escorts typically responded to sonar contact by charging the detected spot and dropping charges in preset diamond or ladder formations. The manual instructed commanders to dive to 400 feet, turn 90 degrees from their path, and remain silent for 20 minutes. By the time the escort returned for another scan, the U-boat would be a mile away from the search zone. What the Germans failed to realize was that their own tactical discipline was creating its own detectable patterns. Every U-boat followed similar escape protocols because they were effective. Dive deep, turn perpendicular, and wait. It was a proven method taught at the submarine training school in Danzig. For British commanders, the problem was a lack of information rather than a lack of skill. Captain Walker had led attacks on 27 sonar contacts in 4 months, but confirmed only 3 kills. The other 24 had vanished into the deep as their commanders executed textbook escapes while Walker's ships bombed empty water. The Admiralty had tried many solutions, including deeper diving charges and the Hedgehog mortar system, which fired 24 contact-fused bombs. They trained escorts to work in teams, with one ship maintaining sonar contact while others attacked. None of these addressed the core issue. Submarines were nearly invisible once submerged in a vast ocean. A disciplined commander could evade almost any surface force by simply going deep and staying silent. British doctrine assumed that U-boats operated rationally and would prioritize survival over aggression once spotted. They believed a commander would break off an attack and escape rather than risk his vessel. This assumption made sense, as a submarine was a massive investment with a highly trained crew. However, this logic missed a vital detail about underwater warfare that would only become clear when an American cook began doing something that seemed entirely irrational. A tactical shift so simple and counterintuitive was about to emerge, and it would take months for intelligence officers to accept its reality. Before we move forward, I would love to hear where you're watching from and what your level of knowledge is regarding World War II anti-submarine warfare. Please leave a comment below and let me know if you have heard of these unusual submarine tactics. If you are enjoying these detailed looks into naval history that altered the Battle of the Atlantic, please subscribe. These stories require significant research to ensure technical accuracy, and knowing you're engaged makes the effort worthwhile.
The breakthrough did not come from a senior officer, but from torpedoman's mate first class Armin Swisher, who had been assigned to galley duty on the USS Barb as a disciplinary measure. Swisher disliked cooking, but was observant of patterns. The Barb was hunting Japanese ships in the Pacific, but the tactical challenge was the same as in the Atlantic. Enemy ships would appear, the sub would maneuver, and by the time the order to fire was given, the targets had moved. They were somehow tracking the Barb even when it was silent. Swisher noticed a detail the officers had missed. Every time he dumped kitchen waste through the trash disposal unit, TDU, the enemy escorts changed course within 20 minutes. They didn't move toward the Barb, but away from its last known spot, as if they were analyzing the debris to predict where the sub would go next. He brought this to Captain Eugene Fluckey's attention on March 9, 1943, suggesting that the enemy was tracking their garbage. Fluckey's initial reaction was to dismiss the idea. The TDU ejected waste at depth, and it was unlikely surface ships could track scattered scraps across the ocean. However, Fluckey was a leader who listened to his crew and ordered an experiment. For 3 days, the Barb performed mock approaches on American cargo ships near Pearl Harbor. Swisher dumped trash at set intervals while the sub moved at periscope depth. The results were shocking. The floating waste created a trail visible from planes at 5,000 feet. Bread stayed afloat for 40 minutes, and vegetable scraps spread in a way that indicated the sub's heading and speed. Most importantly, the debris pattern told observers exactly when the sub had been near the surface. Fluckey realized that if garbage could reveal a position, it could also be used to deceive. The USS Barb was a 312-foot Gato-class submarine that could dive to 400 feet and carried 24 torpedoes. Its real lethality, however, came from Fluckey's willingness to try unconventional ideas. On March 19, 1943, the Barb found a 4-ship Japanese convoy near Formosa, guarded by 2 destroyers. Standard procedure was to fire torpedoes from 1,500 yards and then dive deep to avoid the counterattack. Fluckey decided on a different approach. At 0530 hours, the Barb approached at periscope depth, and Swisher dumped 40 pounds of food waste, peelings, bread, and coffee grounds. This created a visible trail on the surface. Then the Barb dove to 300 feet and turned 180 degrees, moving directly away from the debris. The Japanese destroyers spotted the garbage within 12 minutes and immediately turned toward it, assuming the Barb was continuing on a path extending from the trail. They began a heavy depth charge attack on the empty ocean. Meanwhile, Fluckey moved the Barb to a new position 800 yards from the convoy. The merchant ships had continued on their path, believing their escorts were handling the threat. Fluckey fired 6 torpedoes, hitting 3 ships. The lead freighter broke in half and sank. A tanker exploded into flames, and a third vessel lost power. The destroyers realized their error and rushed back, but the Barb had already dove to 350 feet. Swisher dumped more trash, this time in the opposite direction of their actual path. The destroyers attacked the new debris, and the Barb escaped without taking a single hit. Captain Fluckey submitted a report on this tactic, calling it false trail debris deployment. U.S. Navy intelligence recognized its value and shared it with Allied commands. The British Admiralty received it on April 2, 1943, and Commander Walker read it a few days later. Though skeptical of such a simple idea, he was desperate to change the course of the war. He ordered his ships to store galley waste for tactical use. On April 14, 1943, HMS Starling encountered a wolf pack, and Walker decided to test Swisher's idea in combat.
The results would be studied by the Admiralty for years to come. Walker's application of the tactic was more advanced than the original experiment. British frigates dealt with multiple submarines working together, so the debris had to trick several commanders at once while creating an opening for a counterstrike. At 1340 hours on April 14th, Walker's escort group, Starling, Wren, and Woodpecker, detected 3 U-boats waiting for convoy HX-234. Rather than attacking each one traditionally, Walker had the Starling approach the first contact, U-191, and dump 60 pounds of kitchen waste. The debris spread over a wide area, visible to spotter planes. Then, the Starling turned sharply and slowed down, moving parallel to its original course, but over 1,000 yards away. U-191's commander, Helmut Fien, saw the waste through his periscope and noted in his diary that the enemy seemed prepared for a long pursuit. He followed standard doctrine, dive to 500 feet and wait for the escort to run out of depth charges. Fien did exactly what Walker expected. U-191 dove deep and moved slowly, believing it was safe. However, Walker wasn't following the trash. By 1358 hours, the frigate Wren was positioned directly above the submarine's true location. Using new Type 147B sonar, which could track targets at great depths, the Wren fired a full pattern of hedgehog mortars.
7 of the 24 bombs hit the U-191's hull, and the submarine was destroyed at 480 feet, killing all 49 crew members instantly. The other 2 U-boats heard the blast and assumed the British had developed new deep-diving weapons. They dove to their maximum depth of 750 feet, thinking they would be safe. This was precisely what Walker wanted. At that depth, the U-boats were nearly stationary and their commanders were blind to surface activity. Starling and Woodpecker moved into position for Operation Observant, a tactic designed for deep targets. They dropped Mark 7 depth charges set to explode at 700 feet, creating a lethal box around the targets. U-634 was destroyed shortly after, and U-415 was forced to the surface where it was shredded by gunfire. 3 submarines were eliminated in 74 minutes, and the convoy passed without loss. The tactical discovery was massive. Debris didn't just mislead the enemy, it forced them into predictable behaviors that could be exploited. U-boats would dive deep to avoid perceived aggression, making them vulnerable to coordinated attacks. The Admiralty shared Walker's report with all escort leaders by late April 1943. The document, labeled Tactical Bulletin 1743, described false trail creation and set procedures for attacking deep submarines. The results changed the Atlantic conflict. In April, 15 U-boats were sunk. In May, the number jumped to 41, the highest of the war. Admiral Donitz called it Black May and pulled his ships from the North Atlantic routes. The kill ratio completely reversed, with 3 U-boats destroyed for every merchant ship lost. Armin Swisher never received a formal medal for his idea, as he was just a torpedo man on kitchen duty. However, Captain Fluckey ensured his contribution was documented. After the war, Fluckey noted that the most important tactical shift on the Barb came from a man who was supposed to be cooking eggs, not changing naval history. Commander Walker's career ended tragically in July 1944, when he died of a stroke caused by exhaustion. He had been at sea for nearly 3 years straight. He was buried at sea with honors, having saved an estimated 300 ships and 10,000 sailors. The influence of these tactics lasted long after the war. Modern submarine doctrine still uses deception as a core pillar. During the Cold War, Soviet subs used decoys and noisemakers, while the U.S. developed the MOSS simulator to mimic the sound of a full-sized submarine. The principle remains the same:
mislead the enemy about your location. German commanders never fully adapted to the false trail method.
Post-war interviews showed that many still believed surface debris indicated a real submarine position. One surviving commander wrote that they were trained to hunt, not to question if floating food was a trap. By the time they realized the trickery, most of their experienced leaders were gone. Historians estimate that these tactics, along with better sonar and code breaking, accounted for about 180 U-boat kills by the end of the war. Admiral Donitz lost 630 submarines in total, and nearly 30% of those losses occurred after these deception tactics were introduced. This story offers a vital lesson in military innovation. The most effective changes often come from those on the front lines observing patterns that officers might miss. Swisher wasn't a trained tactician, he simply noticed that trash disposal affected enemy behavior and had the courage to tell a commander who would listen. Sometimes the most important person on a ship isn't the one with the most rank, but the one who asks why. Military history often focuses on technology like radar or computers, and while those were crucial, a cook throwing potato peels overboard was just as significant. The genius was not just in the trick, but in realizing that the enemy's rigid discipline could be turned into a fatal weakness. U-boat commanders followed methods that had worked hundreds of times, but those same habits led to their destruction once the British understood the pattern. Innovation doesn't always need massive funding or years of lab work. Sometimes it just takes one person paying attention to the small things and a leader willing to test a strange idea. Armin Swisher was meant to be washing dishes, but he watched the debris instead. Commander Walker was meant to follow standard doctrine, but he chose to experiment with floating garbage. With just 60 pounds of bread and vegetables, 3 submarines were destroyed in 74 minutes, and the nature of underwater warfare was changed forever. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a new machine, but the ability to see opportunity in a pile of trash. If you found this story as interesting as I did, please like the video and subscribe. There are many more forgotten stories from World War II, and I will be sharing a new one every week. What should I cover next? More about submarines, or should we look at the air war?